deeply involved in our relationship with China. Just let me start by welcoming Dr. Sun Dong, Secretary for Innovation from Hong Kong. It's great to have you in New Zealand, and thank you for coming all this way to be with us today. Can I also acknowledge Ambassador Wang and just say thank you for your hard work in support of deepening the China-New Zealand relationship as well. And of course, it's good to see my parliamentary colleagues, our great Minister of Trade, Todd McClay, I think Jerry Brownlee, Shane Jones, and of course Damien O'Connor. Great to see you all here too, so thank you so much. And can I just thank our co-hosts, Fran O'Sullivan and Simon Bridges. Thank you so much for what you guys do with this event each and every year, and for your passion for this relationship as well, and for creating a forum like this where we can have these debates together. Look, ladies and gentlemen, after first describing the world we operate in, I thought in my time that I have, I wanted to comment on three key areas of the China relationship. Firstly, our frame for the China relationship at the political level. Secondly, the new opportunities that I think exist for exporters in China, and ultimately what this means for business and what you can therefore expect from government. I think let's recognise the moment that we are in, because we are certainly in a much more contested, fragmented and volatile world. That's not an abstract concept, it's something that you are encountering every day, as are we, and you're seeing it in the shifting supply chains and also in the changing regulatory environments. You're seeing it as where trade is being used as a tool of leverage and as the global economy fragments. And in that age of geopolitical contest, this isn't a single crisis that will pass. This is an era of ongoing disruption. It will be our operating environment for the foreseeable future. Now, for New Zealand, which is a small nation that depends on that international order, that new context matters. That shift from rules to power, as I've talked about in recent weeks, it really is a different context by which we are navigating many of our relationships. But our approach is grounded in our core values. We believe in open and predictable trade, we believe in international rules, and of course we believe in the sovereignty and the freedom from coercion. And we believe also in trade diversification. And in a volatile environment, we believe that our national resilience actually comes from having more optionality in our trading environment as well as our security relationships. Now, in that context, China is not just important to us, but it is key to how New Zealand navigates all of that uncertainty out there in the world. Our China relationship is consequential, it's long-term, and it's really important at a time of global economic strain. And so we approach this relationship with respect and also with realism. Our framework for engagement with China, as it is with many of our partners, is the same way. We will cooperate and maximise cooperation wherever we can and where our interests align. We will disagree where we must, and we will communicate and manage those differences in a predictable and a consistent way. And that approach hasn't changed between our two countries. It's understood as the operating framework for how we manage this relationship and how we deepen this relationship. What has changed is certainly the environment around us, and it is one in which we need to squarely focus on New Zealand's interest. My government has prioritised high-level engagement with China because those relationships really do matter. In 2025, to give you a feel for it, we saw 9 ministerial visits to China, including my own, accompanied by a large business delegation. My meetings with President Xi and also Premier Li confirmed that both sides want to grow this relationship further. We collaborate too on shared global interests, whether it's APEC, which China is steering and hosting this year, or whether it's buttressing the rules-based trade system at the WTO. And of course, as with any partner, we are very clear-eyed about New Zealand's interests. And so we speak clearly and consistently to China about issues that matter to New Zealand, and whether they relate to trade practices, regional security, or our commitment to a very peaceful Pacific Islands region. We're upfront about concerns, and we manage risk proactively, and we handle those differences through dialogue and discussion. And that is the balance that we are striking. Now, with respect to trade, China, as you all know, remains our biggest market at $23 billion, and exports were up 13% since my government has come to power. And our mainstays of dairy and meat and wood continue to thrive, and that's all great news. But China is no longer just a commodity story. We're seeing a very important shift. The next phase of the China story, without doubt, is premiumisation, it's branding and innovation. And those preferences, those consumer preferences are changing through the rising middle classes and through the demographic changes that are taking place within China internally. We won't succeed, as we've talked about before, on scale, and so we compete on high value and high trust. And our advantage is in story-driven products supported by digital channels and R&D. Many of you will be experiencing it. Chinese consumers care about the story behind their food. So Kiwi dairy and meat exporters are leaning into those grass-fed credentials, as you've seen, backed by trusted government certification led largely through MPI. New growth in dairy is driven less by commodities and more by high-value ingredients destined for premium bakery products, and the food service sector in China is accelerating fast. Our fruit exports grew 27% to top 1.6 billion in 2025, driven not by bulk supply, but again by Chinese demand for premium branded products competing on quality and innovation. And that's all underpinned by brands like Zespri and their hard work to defend their intellectual property. The government is backing other Kiwi businesses to diversify into premium exports, and we're making good progress on new export pathways for diverse products, things such as deer velvet, for example. So at the same time, we want to grow high-quality tourism and education. And since we implemented the visa changes, which Tim alluded to before, last year, we've seen a 31% leap in Chinese holidaymakers, including an additional 70,000 visitors coming courtesy of us having recognised those Australian visas, which has made it so much easier to travel into New Zealand as well. Our education institutions continue to forge new partnerships in China, which both anchor stronger people-to-people connections and also, obviously, economic growth. For business, I think the message is really simple. China remains one of our biggest opportunities. But the China story is changing, its growth story is evolving, and the biggest opportunities are not where they were. Yes, the Tier 1 cities of Beijing and Shanghai and Guangzhou remain absolutely critical, but there's also incredible dynamism happening in the emerging centres as well. And most of those so-called Tier 2 and 3 centres have populations at least double the size of New Zealand, and they provide immense opportunities now for Kiwi companies to expand their reach using existing China footprints. China is hyper-competitive. It's a hyper-competitive environment. If you spend time there doing business there, it's incredible. It just requires constant innovation, evolution, adaptation just to get a foot in the door or a click on a homepage. And that just means supplying premium products that account for those changing consumption habits and demographic shifts. And it means thinking about adapting brands and your product design to your consumers' preferences in that market. This relationship runs both ways. China remains an important source of imports for New Zealand, growing 9% year on year. China is excelling, as you'll be well aware, in areas like advanced manufacturing, robotics, and clean technology, and that just creates huge opportunities. And one example, small example, is the Kiwi car buyers that are benefiting from the double-digit growth in EV imports into New Zealand. And there's a clear signal for New Zealand and China's success. We must keep moving up the value chain. And Kiwi businesses are doing that through digitally provided education and food innovation. And I think there's just a lot more opportunity for us to continue down that pathway. Whether it be from agri-tech to gaming, these are not future opportunities. They're here today, and they're here for us to seize today. So I guess what's my advice to New Zealanders doing business with China? First, engagement. Relationships really matter more, not less, in very volatile and uncertain times. The trust, the networks, the on-the-ground presence are becoming even more valuable. Secondly, invest in capability. The businesses that are going to succeed understand the Chinese market deeply, they plan for risk, and they maintain very, very strong and deep partnerships. And then thirdly, partnering with China is not an either-or question. China drives 30% of global growth. It's not China or the rest of the world. There is a way and a need to grow with China and deepen partnerships in other corners of the world. So diversification for New Zealand is all about China and not or. Let me just quickly return to the role of government. My philosophy is pretty simple. Our job is to create the conditions for you to go out as business leaders and thrive. We create the conditions for growth, but you have to go drive that growth through building kick-ass, really high-quality companies. We're expanding trade opportunities. We're actively expanding our trade resilience in support of your China and journey. And whether that's the EU, the UAE, the GCC or India, we're building a lattice work of deals that offer economic opportunity and diversification for you. It also means providing certainty in a more volatile and uncertain world, as we talked about at the beginning. Businesses don't expect us to deliver certainty from the global environment, but they also do expect us to deliver certainty from their own government. And so clear policy settings and predictable regulatory frameworks that enable businesses to invest and grow is absolutely critical. It also means being present and engaged. I honestly can't build relationships from behind my desk in Wellington. We have to be out there advocating for New Zealand on the road. And that's why we have taken to the road in the last 2 and a bit years, talking to other leaders, talking to investors between China and New Zealand. My ministers are doing exactly the same, reinforcing the work that you do in market. And I think finally, supporting risk management and resilience. We recognise risk as part of your context. Our role as government is to provide insight, to support diversification, to strengthen supply chain resilience, and help businesses navigate complexity. So let me conclude with this. The world is certainly more uncertain, complex and ambiguous, and it will stay that way. But we have the tools and we have the talent, I believe, to succeed from New Zealand. China, without doubt, will remain absolutely critical to that success, and we want to continue to deepen and broaden that relationship. My job as Prime Minister is to make sure we back you by opening those doors, providing the certainty, and representing your interests with great clarity and great confidence. And to you, I say, as the business leaders, keep building those relationships, keep backing high-value opportunities, and keep investing in the local capability in China. That's how we move up the value chain, that's how we grow our economy, and that's how New Zealand thrives, whatever the world throws at us. We're a small country, but we are a smart, connected and ambitious one. And if we stay focused and outward-looking, we won't just navigate this period, we'll certainly come through it stronger. So kia ora koutou, xie, and thank you very much, and looking forward to the interview by Oprah.
One day I'm going to have a rejoinder for that, but maybe not in public.
If you all look under your cars, everyone gets a free BYD today.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for addressing us. Prime Minister has generously agreed to take questions from the floor, so get your Slido going. This is one of the opportunities that you do have. Look, I'd like to start just by talking a little bit about the strategic competition between the US and China, and how you're navigating that, because it seems to be these defining forces in the global economy are playing a pretty big ping-pong game these days. How do you actually get through that?
Well, I think the first thing to recognise is that New Zealand has an independent foreign policy. So, my job as Prime Minister is to act in New Zealand's national interests and to make sure I'm advancing those interests. We have long-standing relationships with both the US and with China, and they're both very, very important to us. And so we want, what we encourage is really good dialogue between the two major powers in the world. And the more that they can have positive discussions and dialogue and manage the risk in their relationship, that manages the implications, I think, for the rest of us. So for me, it's really about making sure, in a volatile and uncertain world, yes, it's moving certainly from a rules-based system to a power-based system. Yes, it's moving from a multilateral to a multipolar system, as I've talked about before. There are these three big shifts, as we see, from rules to power, from economics to security, and certainly from global efficiency to national resilience. Those are macro trends happening in our geopolitical context. They are an inflection point in the geopolitics that we see out there in the world today. We've been here before, in terms of, I don't think we should be, it's caused anxiety and volatility and uncertainty for sure. But I think, we've been here before in 1918, 1945, 1989 and since 2024. So, we need to acknowledge that's a change, and we'll keep working with our like-minded friends to have influence in that. But in our interests as a small country, it's in the interest to see both the US and China managing their own relationship smartly and intelligently.
If I look back, probably a lot of the political rhetoric, and certainly out of the government departments over the last 3 years, has focused on risk. And you talked about the shift from rules to power and all of that, which is quite true. But today you were very much opportunity focused. What is driving that? Is it the fact of the crisis that we're going through? What do you put that down to?
Well, I think it's just a realisation that, 1 in 4 of our jobs are tied to trade, right? We were in a primary leaders forum yesterday morning in this very hotel, and we were just talking about the fact that 93% of our food is exported. You know, I was in Singapore recently, and you know, they import 90% of their food. So you know, we know that for New Zealand to do well, actually in a more volatile and uncertain world, one of the ways you manage that is you have to build more diversification and create more opportunities, so that when the Americans put tariffs on in their system, which we think is, you know, insane and just not a positive thing. We think that movie doesn't end well. You know, Todd and I can make the case very strongly to the US administration. We still have to find a way to grow in that marketplace. But equally, our exporters now can move production out of, or you know, move their business out of the US or reweight it into Europe or to the UK or into China or ultimately India and other places. And so we're creating optionality, and that creates more, you know, diversification, which then manages that risk.
Have you modified the rhetoric?
Sorry?
Have you modified the rhetoric?
In what way?
From being more opportunity focused now as opposed to risk?
No, I think it's about compartmentalising and managing both. You know, you actually need to be very clear-eyed about what risks you see out there in the world. You can admire the problem, and you can fail to acknowledge that there has been a shift in global geopolitical and the geopolitical environment. And so I'm talking very straight up about that, because I don't want people to be anxious and concerned about it, although they understandably are, because you know, you see allies that are on the 6 o'clock news that are, you know, having tensions with each other. You see trade wars being launched. You see things that we haven't seen for some time. And New Zealand has done well in a post-war environment off that rules-based system, where small countries are treated the same as medium and large-sized countries. So I'm being very clear-eyed about that and saying that's the changing context or environment that we have to manage within. But there are 195 countries in this world with 8 billion people in them, and they're all going through and dealing with that same background that they have to build their propositions out on in a security sense, but also in an economic sense. So I don't see them as being, you know, and I've talked a lot about growth and opportunity that sits in many markets, including China. I think, you know, I've been going to China since probably I was 22 years old, and you know, I came, you know, the last trip with the ambassador, we went to Shanghai, and you know, you come out of Shanghai these days and you go, man, you know, I remember going there first time and just being all bicycles, and now you come out and it's you know, it's Singapore on steroids, right? I mean, it's unbelievable. And when you start to talk to the leader of the province there, and I've had some very good bilaterals with, you know, about where the opportunities are. It's just a fantastically inspiring story of, you know, third world to second world to first world. I mean, it's so inspiring. So I think, you know, there's a new China there. You know, you and I have talked about this, is that, I think you said it, you know, really well, is that, you know, the new China is China, in the sense of, you know, if you want to grow further, there's a lot more growth to have in that relationship. And I think our literacy's got better, you know, in China as well. I think the quality of the partnerships is even better. The knowledge of the New Zealand exporters operating there is better than what I first encountered when I came home from New York.
Hey, just put that business lens on again. I mean, yes, you hark back to when you're 22, but you've done a lot more in business since then. But how do you see the untapped opportunities in China from a business perspective for our business people?
Oh, look, I think if you're a young person setting off in the world from New Zealand, you know, you really want to understand China, and you want to get there, and you want to spend time understanding and knowing it. You know, I've been there, I don't know how many times, 40, 50 times probably, but you know, I remember when I was at Unilever, you know, we were really in the mid-90s, late 90s, really, you know, building out a business in China. And when you get out to those secondary and tertiary cities, and when you think about how you build distribution networks in places like that, and then you see probably the most competitive market in the world and the most discerning market in the world, and how consumer tastes have changed, that's really important. And that would be my advice, is that, you know, I said to Fran, when I was at Unilever, I used to bounce in and out of countries all the time, and I'd go check on the chairman and the CEO and how the business was being run and those kinds of things. You know, I could ask a brand manager, actually, what's the margin here on this product line? How much money do you make with this channel or this distributor? And the knowledge was, I expected my team to know those things. And when I came home to New Zealand, I was actually initially a little bit underwhelmed that we sort of just tended to make the product here, fire it off to a third-party distributor in China, and just hope for the best, more of a production mindset. Now I go to China with our delegations, and honestly, it's truly world-class. the knowledge of the customer, the knowledge of the channels in China, which have been evolving, but more importantly, the quality of the partners that they've been able to find, a new generation of really smart, sophisticated Chinese local partners. I've been very, very impressed by that. So I'm really comfortable with our on point, that we are world class in understanding the channels and the customers. But there's so much more opportunity, tier 2, tier 3 cities, just go look at that.
I was in a briefing yesterday, which was Chatham House. I won't tell you too much about it, but I will say one thing. There was an insight from that in AI and various other areas, a delegation who had been in China basically said they're 6 years ahead of us. How do we get that mentality back here and re-engineer our own economy?
Well, I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think we're missing a big trick on AI in New Zealand. I think we always used to pride ourselves on being very good adopters of technology, and we are on one level. But if I go around the Business Association, the Chambers of Commerce, and I get people to put their hands up who's using some of the AI tools, I'm constantly underwhelmed by how little we are adopting them. I think that actually starts with government. We're really stuck in a 1995 way of doing things. Why can't a 32-year-old mother who needs eyeglasses for the 9-year-old daughter and wants to understand her tax rebates for the with an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old daughters actually be able to just do an inquiry rather than have to go to MSD and IRD and all that stuff? When you want to get a mortgage and you've got to prove ID and income, why isn't that just auto-generated like you'd expect in corporates? And you see in corporates now, it's not coming, it's here. It's been here now for 6 to 9 to 12 months. And so we have to disrupt government and public service with a view of large service organisations that have a customer mentality of serving the New Zealand public and are technology enabled. And of course, when you look at what's happening in China and how they are doing that, I look at places like Estonia, the UAE, New South Wales, and Singapore as well. There's just a huge opportunity. So I think we need a bit of a mindset shift, if I'm honest, in New Zealand about AI. I think we've got to be very alive to the risks and the dangers of AI, but we shouldn't be fearful about that. We need to manage that in a multilateral sense with other friends to build the regulatory frameworks to manage that. But there's more opportunity than there is downside for us in this country because we've had a productivity problem for 30 years under successive governments. One of the 5 things we have to do to make ourselves wealthier is embrace more science, technology and innovation. And that's why, frankly, it's great to have Professor Dong from Hong Kong with us today as well, because actually understanding innovation systems and science systems is really very important. The 2 that I've looked at a lot for New Zealand is really the Irish and the Israeli system, and really we're adopting the Irish system to try and bring our public research institutes together with our businesses, with our universities. To give you a feel for on R&D in New Zealand, we're probably 19th per capita, in terms of our spend on R&D, but we're 46th on commercialisation. And I just hate it when I run into people and they go, "Oh, New Zealand invented that, a piece of science." You go, "That's lovely, sunshine," but actually who invented the $10 billion business? And it'll be some American or some Australian that gets to do that. So we want to brutally commercialise our science system and have it more joined up and less siloed. And I want professors to become millionaires because they're partnering with entrepreneurs and building out businesses like we're starting to see now with Oratane, and we're starting to see with Zethos out of Canterbury and others, where that interface between universities and entrepreneurship and government is all joined up like we see in other parts of the world too.
Now we'll go to some questions from the floor, and the first one from Raymond Young. Does New Zealand welcome China investment, and what sector do you think is the most viable?
Yeah, look, I mean, absolutely. It's a very good question because New Zealand has done a very poor job of attracting foreign direct investment into the country. In fact, we're in the lowest in the OECD, probably bottom 3. And so we know that we've got to get more foreign capital into New Zealand. And it's not just the foreign capital that comes, it's actually also the know-how, knowledge and connection to customers. So a lot of what we're trying to do on, say, the active investor visa, where we've attracted, I think, $4 billion from about 580 high net worth individuals, is we don't want the investment we've seen in the past, which is come and buy a house, a speculative investment. No, we're not interested in that. We want you to come and invest in a productive business where you can bring that capital, but also that knowledge and know-how as well. So we are country agnostic with respect to investment. There's some pretty basic things. We've changed up the OIA. The OIA processing times have really come down big time. We've got to obviously protect some sensitive land and national interest tests, but that's country agnostic. So when I look at China, you're starting to see some good investments in renewable energy in particular, particularly solar, as you'll talk about later on today, I imagine. And I think there's just quite a lot of opportunities for us to do that. We've got massive infrastructure investment to do, obviously a bunch of things. I mean, when you think about it, you know, I've studied small advanced economies of 5 million people or more now, probably for 30 years, since my early 20s. And, you know, what makes us wealthier in New Zealand is going to be a world-class education system, embracing science, technology, innovation, modern, reliable infrastructure, get rid of the red tape, and more trade and investment. They're the 5 things that will lift our collective living standards here in this country. So we welcome investment from China and all countries in those areas.
Just a question from me on that score. You mentioned the national interest test. I mean, do you have a coherent framework for distinguishing legitimate security concerns rather than simply political discomfort?
No, absolutely. It's a very criteria-driven assessment, and you know, we've made that very clear because we want to see more overseas investment in New Zealand, and we've had to get those settings modernised a bit and into the current context. But the national interest test is that for every investor coming into New Zealand. But we want to be more welcoming of investment. You know, we used to have to say it was a privilege to invest in New Zealand. Yes. But actually we should say welcome and thank you for bringing your hard-earned capital to this great country of ours. That's the Irish approach. You know, the Irish have had a massive influx of international investment, but when you show up in Ireland, you have an account manager that actually is here to welcome you, makes the connections, introduce you to 4 or 5 other people that might be in your adjacent sectors or industries, so you can build that rapport and actually build out your business here as well. But So I think we've got good examples of Chinese investment coming in, partnering with local capital and local businesses and bringing their own knowledge and know-how into it as well, and we want to continue to see more of it.
Another question from Lynn. How should we balance our business interests and relationships with China against political issues and geopolitical conflicts when building long-term partnerships?
Well, can I just be really straight with you? As business leaders, just crack on and get on with it. The amount of time I hear business leaders banging on about what the government thinks or what the political context is, just crack on and build wonderful businesses that have outstanding commercial returns, really understand their customers well, and build great internal culture. When I was living in the States for 8 years, I didn't really think too much about what the government thought. They were the last people I really wanted to talk if I built a great company. So I just think in New Zealand, get confident, step into the space, be ambitious, be aspirational, go out and build a great company. And when you think about a market like China, you know, the way I would approach it and did approach it at Unilever originally was, you know, let's just go into a city and let's nail Shanghai for God's sake and become number 1 there. Then we'll roll into the other big centres, and then we roll out into the tier 2, tier 3 places. And so, you know, it's a marvellous market where you've got to understand that there are big differences in consumer preferences, say, and even in Beijing and Shanghai in the old days, let alone in other parts of China. So you need to chop it up and realise it's multiple countries within one big country. It's not a monolithic thing. So I just would push it back to you a little bit to say, yep, understand the canvas you're painting on geopolitically is different, but don't get anxious or worried about that. That's happening to everyone else and all of your competitors, and it's about your relative competitiveness compared to the punter you're competing with.
Mm-hmm. We have a question from Jason Cheng. How would you justify New Zealand's stance on maintaining an independent foreign policy, given it's a member of the Five Eyes Alliance?
Well, we have alliances with lots of folk around the world. You know, that's been a big focus of my government, is building out what we call, mini-lateral lattice work of agreements, whether it's the way that we work with South Korea and Japan and Australia in the IP4 on a security sense, whether it's the way that we're partnering with Singapore for the future of investment and trade, which Todd's going to be hosting the meeting in the middle of the second meeting in the middle of the year here in New Zealand, whether it's the work we did with Singapore on the essential services treaty, where we have a guarantee to supply each other fuel and food. So I think, New Zealand as a country that respects the rules-based system needs to find like-minded friends to actually partner with and model out to the world what a revised multilateral system could look like. We are moving into this multipolar dimension. It's not a predetermined outcome that's where it's going. We can shift it to a better place, but we have to work with others, and that requires us working not just in a traditional sense with Five Eyes partners, which is an intelligence relationship, security relationship, but actually with many others as well. We want to have a as I say, a mini-lateral lattice work of security and economic agreements all around the world. I mean, that's really what it's about. Because again, that's how we diversify and manage and de-risk it for ourselves in a trade and in a security sense.
Here, another question. What unique strengths does New Zealand have in providing a value-based proposition to China rather than a volume-based proposition?
Yeah, well, I'm just always amazed in my visits to China that having seen a country move from low income to middle income and increasingly to high income, that shift is meaning that there is huge demand for New Zealand products and services. When people, as I said, have said before, used to get paid in daily coins, didn't have a formal employer, they now want to have better quality food and produce. They want to travel domestically and internationally. They want kids to get educated. They're now saving money for retirement. Those retirement funds need to be invested in infrastructure and therefore investment into a place like New Zealand. So we just have a massive opportunity to continue to ride the growth that exists within China. And of course, as a small country, the beautiful thing is you don't need much to make your whole system sort of work. You just need to focus. I often thought, why don't we just do a free trade agreement with a city within China, or a retailer within China? It's as big as a country. So why wouldn't we think about it differently? Because we don't need that much for our system to benefit from, deepening up and finding new sources of gold and partnership with China and New Zealand.
Yeah, before I come back to the questions from the floor, I mean, we've talked from time to time about your relationship with particular political leaders in China, and obviously you don't want to comment on the president, but tell me about the Premier.
Yeah, look, Premier Lee, I've got a lot of time for. I really enjoy my interactions with him. I find him very personable, very positive individual. I've obviously met with him and hosted him here in New Zealand, and obviously met with him in China. And so, one of the conversations I remember really enjoying having with him was, with the changing demographics in China, how do you manage a shift in their, pension system? It's a conversation that we're having in New Zealand and trying to have in New Zealand, recognising that we're living longer and therefore retirement age of 65. I think, and the ambassador will probably correct me, I think it was 55 or something in China. But, he and I had a really good chat, for example, about that. And so I really enjoy my time with Premier Lee. I find him really great to deal with, very positive. We can get straight to the chase on the issues between us and between our countries. As I said, we every relationship you have with every country, it's not China, it's like how do you cooperate where you can and where you differ where you must. As I said, Todd and I have just gone through that with the Americans. I mean, we want to cooperate where we can, and we're selling into America. Yes, we're growing our business, I think, 13 or 14% the last 2 years, despite tariffs. But we also are very clear with the Americans. We think that movie doesn't end well. I mean, that is bad for them and bad for the world, is our view, and we're happy to express that. And so the same happens with China, where we have differences. We need to be able to talk them through and be very straight up with each other, because there is trust there, and we need to be able to have real conversations with each other. So Premier Lee's, I really enjoy him. President Xi I've met with a lot, and I have huge respect for as well, for what he's done, lifting China and lifting so many people out of poverty and putting them into the middle class has been pretty impressive. It's just that they're more formal meetings, as the ambassador will understand, and he really represents the China system, and Premier Lee is just someone I've just got to know a bit more personally.
Can I put an Oprah question? And did the Premier write your National Party super policy?
No, but it's great. But I mean, there's a good example where, as a leader to leader, in those relationships that you're forming in order to advance New Zealand's interests, and every leader's got a different personality, is that you're wrestling with some of the same problems, right? You realise that, as I said, there's 195 leaders, 195 countries. We've all got some of the same challenges, and so the question is that in that debate and discussion, he ended up, finding a way to make when you got 1.4 billion people. If we think superannuation's a touchy subject in a country of 5.3 on a good day, he's found a way through that, and so those are kind of examples of where you realise we've got a lot more in common than we've got in difference in some cases.
Okay, back to the floor. You've emphasised the importance of young Kiwis exploring China, but the PM's scholarships for Asia have been defunded. Is a replacement scheme coming? Yeah,
look, I'm happy to look at that. But again, I just say to New Zealanders, in the New Zealand business community, we are moving from a parent-child relationship to an adult-to-adult-to-adult one. Many of you know I'm a big fan of Viktor Frankl, and a book I read when I was in my teenage life, and he talks about Western society, for want of a better frame, being comprised of three different actors. Government that essentially sets up the operating system, business leaders like yourself that can move with great speed, scale, and can execute really well, and then the community leaders that actually see the pain, the hurt, the need, and the frustration. And so the three of us as the actors in our society need to be working together on the challenges, but also the huge opportunities that we have. And so you don't need to wait for a Prime Minister's scholarship scheme. I'm sure we can look at that and see if we've got the settings right or wrong on that. But just get on a frickin' plane and go there and go meet someone and go say hello. When I used to go to China as a 22-year-old, the first thing I did was I had a rule, which was I never wanted to meet anybody from the business for a day. Or preferably for half a day, because I found that we had a lot of expatriates in China. They lived in compounds. They were quite detached from the customer and from the consumer. So I had a rule everywhere I went, which was that as soon as I land at the airport, I get 2 hours to go straight from the airport into a house of a local consumer in China, so that I can ask them anything and everything I want to ask. How do they live? What are the issues they're dealing with? How do they use different products? All those kinds of things. And so, I would be, I was looking after Dove soap or something at that point. I would be, or hair care products, weirdly, and you'd be in someone's bathroom saying, well, why do you choose this brand over that brand? And, what's your thinking? But equally, how do you feel about life in China? How are you feeling about, how things going for you and the economy and that stuff? So I think, just get connected to consumers and get a feel for what's going on. And then from there, you'll get insights that you can build your business around really strongly.
Another question here from Gareth Winslow, I think. How do you advise New Zealand sporting bodies to balance the commercial necessity of large-scale Chinese sponsorship against the reality of navigating increasingly complex geopolitical risk?
Well, again, I don't know why the geopolitical risk, would be involved in a conversation like that. Do you know what I mean? So from a sport, I just wouldn't get too hung up on that. I think, I'd be trying to do the right commercial deal with the right sponsorship partner, whether Chinese or anybody else, frankly, from around the world. So, as a business person, I wouldn't get hung up on that.
One from Ethan. In an increasingly fragmented world, our own understanding of China is now more important than ever. How is the government ensuring we build China capability here in New Zealand?
That's a good question. I think I would say to you, I have been really impressed by the work of NZTE. I think many of you in the room will be. It's always easy to take a shot at the government, but when I look at other small countries around the world, to have an organisation led by a great CEO and Pete Crisp, I think, has done an outstanding job with his people and building great culture and is just a great leader. But, is genuinely making things practical and pragmatic for our businesses here, who often, New Zealand, it's hard for New Zealand business people sometimes to crack the world, right? Because we have such a benign, lovely environment. We all know each other. We understand the flows between government and business and community is very open. We're very relationally driven. We understand the New Zealand system well. But even when you go to Australia, man, those guys are a bit tougher and more direct and harder. And then you go to a place like China and, what you do in New Zealand may or may not be helping you be successful in China. So, I think, lean into the resources of NZT. I think they've get a lot of asks. But also I just say to you, as an entrepreneur, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you really have to get on the plane and understand the customer and consumer for yourself. That we have to shift the mentality that I'm going to go build a great business as a CEO with my team. I'm going to learn these markets. I don't wait for the government to help me work out what my AI strategy is or how I open up in China. Having said all that, I think we've done an exceptionally good job, and I look at what the Irish have done and what the Kiwis have done. I think that's the best in the world in terms of our market literacy and building our fluency and literacy in markets like China. So lean into the NZTE resources, but then drive it yourself. Do you know what I mean? And I know I'm pushing back a bit on that, but it's just I'm trying to get into this habit of adult, where as business leaders, we need to go out there in the world ourselves and learn these markets as well.
We've run out of time for questions from the floor, but just one up some, I guess.
Let's take a few more. I'm happy to go a bit longer.
No, we've got other people coming.
I know. This could quite possibly be the most interesting meeting I'm having all day.
No, I'm sorry. We're on a train. Anyway.
You should run an airline. On-time performance and all that.
We're trying. Hey, sorry, I've completely knocked off my course then, which wouldn't be very good if I was an airline, would it? Hey, just if you could give one piece of advice to CEOs in the room thinking about their China strategies for the next 10 years, what would it be?
Yeah, ambition, go for it. I mean, China is an exciting place. It's constantly evolving. Don't rely on your past knowledge. It's changing every 18 months. You need to get in there, understand the customer, understand the channels, work out a strategy that actually is how you're going to chop up a big place and actually just work your way through it. And there's a lot of opportunity. I mean, this is an incredible country, China, amazing country. I've been very inspired by the example I've seen over 30 years of just going there myself. And so just get into it, and determined to keep seeing it afresh, because we get into a paradigm of how we think we understand it, and it's changing and evolving. So it's a very stimulating and inspiring place. So just get into it.
Okay, look, thank you very much, Prime Minister, for your time, and I'm sorry we have run out of time, otherwise it would have been great to prevent you from going to some horrible meeting you must be having, where you'll be put through your paces, I imagine. No?
No, every day's a test.
Okay. Anyway, please join me in thanking the Prime Minister for his time. Thank you. We'll just take a moment while I get a lapel mic on.
Hours on whether his party would support the legislation. He initially promised to fix it after the election, then promised not to support